be providing something of an overview, and I believe people may be coming and going throughout the presentation, so I'll do my best to keep flow while also responding to any questions that come up or any ideas that people have. I'm basically working from a 1-hour presentation that we do pretty regularly. We have a webinar series that we do every Wednesday from 4 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. in the evenings. So today, being the first Wednesday of the month, we'll be doing this presentation this evening at 4. So every first Wednesday of the month, we go through our sex trafficking overview to provide a baseline of information understanding. It's a bit dense. It's a lot of information. And in fact, the first time we did this, we realized we've got a lot more to say after an hour. So we formed a second webinar called Trauma-Informed Response to Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children. And we do that on every second Wednesday of the month. So if you'd like the part 2 of this, please tune in Wednesday next month for that. And then we do a number of different topics. As a guy in this space talking about sex trafficking, I've come to realize that men and boys are oftentimes excluded from the conversation, and oftentimes we exclude ourselves from the conversation. But we can't be doing that. We've got to be part of this. So to be intentional to engage more boys and men, we created a webinar called Guy Talk, where it's open to anybody. All of our webinars are, but we wanted to make sure we had a safe space, a welcoming space for men to who may want to be part of the conversation. We also do an online safety one. We do 10 actions that you can take right now to combat sex trafficking. So we have a number of offerings there, and then we do a lot of professional development trainings, as well as go into classrooms and train high school students. And we have some content available for 5th grade students, believe it or not. We worked with Lily O'Connor Trust to develop some things there. We are active on Oahu, Hawaii Island, Maui, Kauai, and even a little bit on Molokai sometimes. But we have staff here on Oahu where I am. I'm simply filling in for Anastasia Ayers, our program director on Hawaii Island, just because she's busy sharing her light with another group right now. So we are active on Hawaii Island, and that's why we wanted to make sure that we were a part of today's sessions. Let's see. I think we just have Charles and Dave on right now, but let me go ahead and begin here and give a little bit of an overview. I always start with some guidelines because this is a heavy topic. It's tough to talk about, it's tough to hear about. So during the course of our conversation today, or presentation, or anytime you're talking about this topic, please make sure you're respecting yourself entirely. It is hard to talk about, especially if this is something that hits home for you or someone that you know and care about. But number 2, please respect the people around you. You never know the burdens other people are carrying. And as trafficking and sexual exploitation are generally very hidden things in a person's life, make sure that we're being respectful, that not everyone's going to share their experiences, and not everyone's going to be comfortable talking about their experiences. So we want to make sure that we're creating a safe space for people who may have been exploited or may know people who have. And finally, it's important that we consider the other people in our lives. I know sometimes we come with a professional lens, or sometimes we come with a Jeffrey Epstein documentary lens, or the movie Taken type lens, and we forget that this stuff could be happening closer to home. So if we think about our own our own sons, daughters, nieces, nephews, this information will stick better. It'll make more sense. It'll be more applicable, and really we have a chance not just impact the trafficking around the world, but really impact the young people in our own lives and in our own communities. So just a quick self-assessment. I don't have a formal poll, but just some questions to ask yourself as we get started here. But have you ever been educated or trained on sex trafficking? And then feel free to use the chat if you'd like to respond, to ask questions, to answer questions if you'd like to. But have you ever been educated on this topic? For most people, the answer is no. And for many, it's important to realize that this may be the only time someone in your circle of friends has ever been educated on the topic. It is hard to get into spaces. It is difficult to talk about this. Denise, I see that. Denise, I have a question because I recognize the last name Pacheco. I know it's not. I know you're not the only Pacheco in Hawaii. But have you tuned into our webinars before? Just because, like I said, I recognize the name. If you're comfortable letting me know, that'd be great. But so Ray, you've not been trained on this. Rarely do people get training on this. There's actually no requirement for this training anywhere in Hawaii, whereas a lot of states require law enforcement or educators or hospitality and tourism or first responders to be trained in this. In Hawaii, That's not the case. So a lot of people here have never been trained on this. So you might become the leading expert in your circle of friends or your circle of influence just by tuning in for a little bit today. Next question. Do you know what sex trafficking is? For those, maybe you've been trained on this, maybe not, but just recognizing, maybe you've never thought about what it actually is. It's easy to assume it's what you see in the movies, but there's more to it. Do you believe sex trafficking happens in Hawaii? Whenever I start talking about this, a lot of people say, well, at least we don't have to worry about that here, right? I say, well, I wish that, but that's just not the case. There is sex trafficking here in Hawaii. And then the next question, do you believe sex trafficking happens in your school or in your community? And for as many people as might believe that it happens in Hawaii, most people don't think it happens anywhere near them. So it's kind of this weird, this otherness syndrome. It happens here, but not here. It happens here, but really it happens over there, not here. And that's a really dangerous mentality to have. Because really, when we say that sex trafficking doesn't happen here, when we say that it does not happen in our schools and our communities, the message we're sending to the victims, the survivors in our spaces, we don't believe you. We don't believe your experience. And there's nothing you can do that will convince me otherwise. And even if you do come to me with a problem about sex trafficking, I'm not going to know what to do about it. So it's not even worth it. So we really have to make sure we're being thoughtful in how we address these questions. Do you think you could identify it if you saw it? Do you know how to report sex trafficking? Do you feel comfortable reporting it? It's one thing to know how to dial a number. It's another thing to actually feel comfortable pushing those buttons and talking to somebody. And then finally, do we feel comfortable talking to young people? Or do we feel comfortable receiving a young person who might want to explain to us, hey, this happened to me? That's a hard thing. So sex trafficking in Hawaii, here's what it looks like here. Before we even get into some of these research studies that have been done here, because there's really only 3, and all 3 are really great. I love them. I know the researchers, and I like how they were conducted. But we'll get into this. Before I go on, let me pause to introduce myself. I'm sorry I didn't really do that. My name is Tim Hitchens. I'm the Education and Training Program Manager at Hoola Na Pua. My background is social work. I've done child investigations child abuse investigations for a long time. Most of my work was done in Philadelphia, so I'm grateful for those who receive me here. And really, I try to impart my experiences, my knowledge, the things that I've picked up along the way to really help you to impact your communities and to keep the kids around you safe. So with that, just quick introduction, let me continue here and get into the meat and potatoes of what we're talking about today. Oftentimes I get the question, Tim, how many kids in Hawaii are trafficked every year? It's a reasonable question. It's logical. We all want to know, how big of a problem is this? You're telling me it happens here, but how much? One time I was presenting in a church and someone asked this question, and it impacted me really differently that day because I knew there were survivors in the audience. I knew there were people in that audience who had experienced sex trafficking themselves. Some of them had talked about it, some of them had not. But I knew enough about their experiences to know that they had already been assigned a value. They'd already had a price put on them and their sexuality. They'd already been bought and sold. They had already been turned into a commodity for the convenience of somebody else. And really, I felt in that moment, man, if I talk about these people who've experienced this as numbers, I'm not helping them. I might be satisfying someone else's itch to know about this number and have a value assigned, but how much damage am I doing in the process? How much am I hurting and re-victimizing and marginalizing and belittling these human beings who've experienced something really, really traumatizing? So I don't talk about a number like that. The reality is only about 10% of all trafficking is actually reported anyway. 10%. So when we start talking about numbers, there's not much value in trying to guess a number, trying to put a number, because there's a number of reports, number of investigations, number of convictions, and those numbers are all frighteningly and terrifyingly low. So we know we're missing most of the reality anyway. And is it really worth it to put to re-victimize, to re-traumatize, to re-marginalize survivors for that? So with that disclaimer out there, there are 3 reports here in Hawaii that really help to paint a picture of what trafficking looks like. The first one looked at demand, because really, just like any market, supply is only meeting demand. If there were no demand, there'd be no supply. There'd be no distribution. There'd be no traffickers. There'd be no pimps. There'd be no recruiters into this sort of work. If nobody wanted iPhones, there'd be no iPhones. If nobody wanted Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, there'd be no Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. But the fact that people want these things, the traffickers, or in those situations, they're not traffickers, the businesses create the demand. They create the supply. They pull it all together because there's money to be made there. So they look at demand. The first they looked at demand. And to try to find out a little bit about the demand, they posted a sex ad. They posted an ad on a site called Backpage.com. They went to Backpage, they found the Hawaii section, they posted a sex ad in that section, and they realized there were one of 58 sex ads posted that day just in Hawaii, just on that website. Well, the responses started rolling in, and within 24 hours, they received 735 responses, just that one ad. They screened out the duplicates and still found 407 responses to that one ad. Now, this ad wasn't specifically a trafficking situation. I don't want to get it twisted here, but the fact of the matter is the demand for buying sex does contribute to the exploitation of others. There are some people who volunteer to do this, who do this consensually, but there are many who don't, and the demand that drives the traffickers, the recruiters, to start seeking people in those spaces more and more. So 407 unique responses to that one sex ad. I don't know if that seems like a lot or a little bit to you, but they did the same sort of experiment. I hear some background noise. I'm just going to mute people as you come in. I apologize. Feel free to unmute yourself if you have questions. We have a small enough group, but just for everyone's ability to focus, including my own, I'm going to mute people as you come in. Anyway, so to get back on topic here, so 407 unique responses. A little crowd participation because they did the same experiment in Phoenix, Arizona, Boston, Massachusetts, Denver, Colorado, and Chicago, Illinois. What do you think the response rate was in Phoenix? Phoenix has 1.6 million people. The state of Hawaii has 1.5 million people living here. So if Hawaii got 407 responses, how many responses do you think Phoenix got? Go ahead and use the chat, or if you would like to unmute yourself and throw a guess out there, let me hear what you think. 407 unique responses to a sex ad posted here in Hawaii. How many responses do you think they got when they posted a sex ad in Phoenix? Any guesses? Phoenix has about 100,000 more people living there. Do you think it was a little bit more, a little bit less, a whole lot more, a whole lot less? Any guesses? Any brave souls want to take a stab here? 800? Ray, appreciate the guess. So we're picking on Phoenix a little bit. So Ray, because you're the only one guessing, oh, 600, there we go, Denise, so you're guessing 600. So we're thinking a little bit more than Phoenix. I'll give the answer now, that's a good enough guess. 44. Phoenix had 44 responses. Hawaii had 407. Chicago, the city of Chicago is the third biggest city in the United States. They have about 2.7 million people living there. Chicago had 25 responses. Boston had 22. Denver had 20. Hawaii had 407 responses. It's not close, right? And there's not, we don't have other cities for comparison because these are the only 4 cities where they did the exact same study. So it's not even close. That's a lot. That's a significant demand, I would say. Now it's just the one ad, not all 58. That was just the one ad just within 24 hours, just in Hawaii. So there's a significant demand here. And you might be thinking, why? What's going on here in Hawaii that makes such a significant demand? A couple sort of things. For one, we have a significant transient population. We have a lot of people just passing through Hawaii. We have visitors, we have tourism, we have military, we're right in between mainland Asia and mainland America, so we have a lot of conventions here. Our convention center right across the street, strip clubs and massage parlors right around there. So we have a lot of people passing through who can contribute here without where they wouldn't do things back home, perhaps. I was talking to one military leader, and he said, we have all these guys from the military. They come in for a week of training to go to the massage parlors and strip clubs. They invite the girls back to the hotel rooms afterwards, all this sort of stuff. They're not really traffickers. Okay, I get it. I don't want to call them traffickers either. They seem like great guys. On the other hand, are they really verifying age and consent? Because this is where a lot of the trafficking happens without us really knowing that it's happening there. So we have a lot of people passing through, a lot of people contributing, again, to the demand. The other piece is, in Hawaii, you can't go far. You know, if you're trying to buy sex in Hawaii, you're going to buy it locally. You can go to Vegas, you can cross island, you can go to a different island, but the reality is that most people are staying closer to home to buy sex here. So we have a bit more concentration just for that. Good question. What was the content of the ad? Gender, services, age. It didn't specify age. It didn't specify, I think it was a female ad, and it was just for sex, for money. It wasn't specific to age. So good question. I don't know if it specified the services or if it was more like for a good time call. Good questions. The ads were uniform across the board there. So it was just an open ad. And I will talk a bit more about demand, because the reality is it's sometimes hard to tie the demand to the exploitation. because yes, there are sex workers who volunteer, who are choosing to do this, who are consenting to this sort of work, and I don't want to suggest otherwise. The reality is, though, that there's an awful lot of crossover into exploitation in those spaces. You go to a strip club, you go to a massage parlor, you think you're helping someone through. Just based on my research, based on the people that I know in these spaces, it's not all what it seems to be. I'm connected with some survivor groups, and I said I was going to do these presentations to men. Are there messages that you'd like the men to know in these spaces? And the one survivor got back and said, yeah, the reality is that I've worked at the buy me drink bars. I've worked at the strip clubs. I've done these different things. The money you thought was going into my pockets to feed me, to help me get through school, those sort of things, no, it wasn't. There was tip outs. I wasn't even paid a regular salary. The money went back to the bar, went to the bouncers, and as soon as I walked out of the club, I had to hand over $1,000 to my pimp or my trafficker. And I couldn't report this because I depended on that person for safety, for security, all these sorts of things. Pornhub is another avenue where a lot of people think pornography is no big deal. It's victimless. It's just taking care of your needs, whatever that might be. But Pornhub was on the hook for a lot of sex trafficking. A big article came out in the New York Times in, I think it was January this year, called The Children of Pornhub, but you can look into it. In response, MasterCard, Visa, PayPal all withdrew their payment options to Pornhub because the reality is there was so much rape material and so much trafficking material on Pornhub. There were 3 guys who ran an organization, I guess you call it, a business that was short-lived, called the Girls, I think it was called Girls Do Porn or something like that. But all these girls had signed up for a business proposition. They didn't try to get into pornography. They thought this was going to be limited capture, limited release type stuff. All of it ended up on Pornhub. One of those guys was just sentenced to sex trafficking, so he's in jail for, I think, 20 years. The other guy's on the FBI's most wanted list, and the other guy's in jail waiting for his sex trafficking court date. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into these spaces that we never really think about. Again, people think strip clubs are fine, and there are some people making money there legitimately, massage parlors and these sort of demand spaces. So it's a good question. I know it's a really sensitive topic because there are a lot of people who don't want to be associated with those things, don't think that they're contributing, but in the reality they really may be. So I can certainly get into more of that as we go. I'll talk a little bit more about demand as we go. But yeah, good question about what the content of the ads were. And again, this was just to measure demand for commercial sex. It wasn't specifically trying to gauge sex trafficking. I don't want to flip-flop that at all. All right, the second study. For the second study, they talked to 22 survivors of sex trafficking. These are 22 people who are grown up now, but when they were minors, they were sex trafficked here in Hawaii. Among the questions that came up in the interviews, what was your relationship with your trafficker? Only 1 out of the 22 survivors said it was a complete stranger. 13 said it was a boyfriend. Others said it was a friend. Others said it was a relative. Others said it was a drug dealer. But by and large, the most significant portion said it was my boyfriend, someone who I saw as a romantic interest. And they asked, well, who were the buyers? Who was buying the strip dances? Who was buying the happy ending massages? Who was buying the pornography or live cams or whatever sexual service you're providing? Who was buying it from you? Well, it included locals, visitors and tourists, military, law enforcement, doctors, politicians, and people in the criminal justice system. You may as well throw social workers in there and teachers in there and guidance counselors and construction workers, because the point here is that there's no stereotype of a buyer. And I'm sure some of these people knew full well what they were doing. I remember hearing one guy talk, and he considered himself to be a reformed buyer. He was in his 40s. He'd gone through a messy divorce. He had started seeking companionship through online ads and was buying from consensual providers, on and on and on. But first he was seeking 40-somethings, people in his age range. Then he found himself finding himself drawn to 20-somethings who were a little bit younger, maybe a little bit more energy. I don't know. But then he went to buy from a 15-year-old. After he'd bought from an 18-year-old, he went to buy from a 15-year-old. And that's when he got busted by the cops. So you can see it really could be anybody. There was a guidance counselor, Kapolei High School here on Oahu, who was convicted of trafficking or buying sex from a minor in 2016. So it could really be anybody. So I don't want us to think, oh my gosh, the dirty tourist or the dirty law enforcement or military or whatever. It really could be anybody. So I put these labels up here not because I want to sound like I don't like these groups or anything like that. We've got to be careful. It's really just to highlight there's no stereotype of a buyer. And in these situations, they were buying sex from minors, so it would have been sex trafficking specifically. The third study. In this situation, we worked with Child and Family Services, and they provided surveys to the population they were serving, not just sex trafficking or sexual specific, but the general population they were serving. They got 363 surveys back. And this was split between Hawaii Island and Oahu, so this does impact Hawaii Island. They got 363 surveys back. Of those 363 individuals, 26.7% said they had experienced sex trafficking themselves. Of those who had experienced sex trafficking, 23% said it started before they turned 18 years old. And of those who had experienced sex trafficking as a minor, the average age of first exploitation was 11.3 years old. That was the average age. Some in this study were as young as 5 and 6 years old. They asked them again, what was your relationship with your trafficker? 25.8% said it was a family member. A different 24.7% said it was a friend. A different 22.7% said it was a boyfriend. And a different 9.3% said it was a girlfriend. That adds up to 84%. 84% of those said that who had experienced sex trafficking said it was at the hands, or at least they were introduced to it by a friend, a family member, or a romantic interest, someone that they felt safe around, someone they felt connected to, someone who was already a part of their life, someone who would not be described as a trafficker, someone who their primary relationship, if you were to ask them, they're like, no, that's my boyfriend, that's my girlfriend, that's my friend, that's my family. Maybe even that's my manager or something like that. That second study, the 22 survivors. While they've been sex trafficked, they were still going to school. They were seen in hotels and motels. They were seen in emergency rooms and hospitals by healthcare providers. They were seen by a lot of people, a lot of adults, a lot of good people, and nobody offered them any help along the way. For me, this is a very convicting slide. While I was not in Hawaii while they were experiencing their sex trafficking here, I was in Philadelphia. I was working with young people. I was in schools. I think back to when I was in high school. I wonder if friends of mine or acquaintances or others in my classroom may have been experiencing sexual exploitation the whole time. I didn't know. And I didn't know what to look for. And I might have thought it was some other, situation going on. I don't know. These are my thoughts. And these are the things that I hear from a lot of people when I say, hey, let's talk about sex trafficking. They say, well, that doesn't happen here. We don't need to worry about that here. It certainly doesn't happen in our school or in our community. I don't see any sex trafficking, so I don't really know why you're bringing this up. Our Keiki know better. It's not really my business. I assumed it was under control, or I figured someone else was taking care of it, or I didn't think it was really that bad. Maybe I saw something, but I didn't think it was so bad. Or I figured, they'll figure it out. For our boys, oftentimes, boys will be boys. Boys will be boys. And so we overlook the involvement of boys as both the exploited party or as a part of contributing to the demand. We just don't even think about boys. For boys, I did a lot of research on this, on the boys who are being exploited. I did a lot of research over the past year, and a lot of what the studies found is that law enforcement, first responders, and emergency room staff oftentimes look at boys and think, well, he's just exploring his sexuality. On the flip side, he's the perpetrator. Rarely are boys considered a vulnerable population. Rarely are they considered to be possibly exploited themselves. So we overlook our boys all the time. And then finally, oftentimes we just think, I don't know what to do. I saw something, it stuck with me. I had a hard time sleeping, but I really didn't know what to do about it. So as we go today, I'll get through some of these things and talk a little bit more about some of those things. But most of my presentations start with dispelling myths because we have preconceived notions. A lot of us, we've been educated on this topic by Netflix, by Google, by the news. Like, that's our sources of information, and I get it. But I really, want to fight back a little bit against some of those notions. So here's what a lot of people think of sex trafficking. And if you go to the United Nations Office of Trafficking in Persons report, you see this image. If you Google search sex trafficking, this is the sort of thing that comes up. A scared girl with a big hand over her mouth. A lot of times we think of the movie Taken, part 1, 2, or 3, and so we start thinking, well, this has to be like an international thing. There's underground sex trade organizations. Sometimes we think about Jeffrey Epstein, and that's where our mind goes. We think about the creepy white van. We think about the stranger danger message, which is a good message, but it's not really capturing everything we need to be capturing. We think about this scenario, the shady mustache man approaching these girls on their playground and hoping to lure them away to sell them to some creepers somewhere. I don't know. The third world country tent cities and this the red light districts, the brothels, the street prostitution of like Amsterdam or somewhere else that we might think about it in Western Europe, or some other country, not to specify too much. Or last summer, I don't know, did anybody see the news or all the Facebook stories about zip ties and painter's tape? Or maybe you saw the hype about Wayfair Gate. I've got to add that little cloud on this this image. This is what a lot of people think of when we think about sex trafficking. But here's the reality. According to the National Human Trafficking the hotline, only about 7.2% of the calls that they get have anything to do with abduction or kidnapping. 7.2%. Another study that compiled a bunch of research from 2011 found that number was closer to 9.8%. Either way, if we think that all sex trafficking is abductions and kidnapping, we're missing more than 90% of the problem. I mentioned, just recently, here in Hawaii, the 84% of the trafficking happens at the hands of family, friends, or romantic interests. So again, that stranger danger is an important message, but it really can be distracting. There's a lot more to it than just looking out for strangers. This whole international piece, people confuse trafficking with smuggling. Smuggling is generally a voluntary thing. People want to leave their countries, and so they pay people to do that. Trafficking is generally an involuntary sort of thing. Around the world, according to the United Nations, around the world, trafficking is more oftentimes domestic. Here in Hawaii, it's about 82% of the time it's domestic, meaning that the victims already live here. This is continental, this is Alaska, this is Hawaii. So the trafficking, some of it comes from the southern border, some of it comes from parts of Asia, some a little bit from Canada, a little bit from Europe, and then a small amount from Africa. But mostly it's domestic. So again, if we're just focused on borders, we're just putting our money into border security and harbors and ports, we're missing most of the problem by a significant margin. I mentioned boys. Across the United States, they've compiled all the research and they found that somewhere between 35 and 40% of the young people who are exploited are boys. Here in Hawaii, that third study found that number to be about 23% of those who said they'd been trafficked were males. A lot of people think that all traffickers are men, but around the world, 36% of trafficking prosecutions have been brought against females. The numbers here in Hawaii and in the United States are so small, it really didn't make sense. So that's why we looked at the global percentage of trafficking prosecutions. Here in Hawaii, there have been so few prosecutions. There have been a couple international cases that have been tried here. On the state level, there's still no successful prosecutions for the state trafficking. We just got new laws in June, so hopefully that'll get a little bit better. The rest of this stuff, the movie Taken, the Hollywood, the dramatization of these sorts of things, zip ties, painter's tape, Wayfair Gate, while they do drum up a lot of attention, while we did get more requests for presentations and information during those sort of hype moments, they're really distractions. They take our focus off of our own communities, off of our own schools, off of our own children. And that I find to be kind of dangerous. It provides more opportunities for education, but again, I spend all this time dispelling myths and less time getting into the heart of the problem. So the reality is sex trafficking does happen here in Hawaii. It does happen to boys and girls. It happens in our communities. It happens really, locally, and we need to be focusing on that. So I'm going to spend some time giving the full definition of sex trafficking. I'm going to move a little bit quickly and hopefully just highlight some of the key elements because it does get a little bit wordy, a little bit complicated. But here's the simplest form of a definition. All right, and this comes from the federal definition, the Sex Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000. Any sexual activity plus anything of value is commercial sex. All right, that's commercial sex federally and at the state level. Same sort of stuff. Anytime there's sexual activity where there's anything of value promised, provided, or agreed to, it is commercial sexual activity. What makes it trafficking is when you involve anybody under the age of 18 or when the elements of force or fraud or coercion are involved. That means if you have a 17-year-old engaging in sex for money, that is sex trafficking, and that 17-year-old is perceived to be the victim of the crime. All right, in simplest terms. Here's the full federal definition: recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, obtaining, patronizing, or soliciting of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act in which the commercial sex act is induced by force or fraud or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform such act has not yet turned 18 years of age. All right, that's a full federal definition. So you'll see it's more than just the buying and the selling or the actual trafficking. It includes recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing, obtaining, patronizing, or soliciting. So soliciting means to ask. So if you're asking around, if you reply to an ad, if you're like, yes, I am seeking a 16-year-old to have sex with, and I'm willing to pay for this, that by itself, even if there's no exchange, is an offense. right? So it's a much bigger problem than I think people realize. Now, CSEC, or commercial sexual exploitation of children, is another term that we use somewhat interchangeably, but the reality is it's kind of a bigger umbrella term that includes sex trafficking and a range of crimes against young people. So again, sex trafficking involves first a commercial sex act. And I'd like to break it down this way because sometimes we don't think about what a sex act is. It's not just intercourse. It includes intercourse. It includes oral sex and anal sex and sexual touching, masturbation, touching somebody else sexually, someone else touching you sexually. It involves stripping, live cams, pornography, sexting, sexually explicit escort services, massage services. All these things are sexual activity, again, by themselves, as long as we're talking about consenting adults, not illegal. What makes it a commercial sex act is when you provide a promise or offer anything of value to anybody. It could be offered to that young person, it could be offered to a parent, a caregiver, a manager, a boss, anyone else. Things of value include cash, a place to stay, a car, jewelry, branded clothing, shoes, a game system, a cell phone, a second cell phone, paying a cell phone bill, paying rent, paying utilities. All these things are of value. If you've been hungry, a spam musubi has great value. If you have been sleeping on the streets for a little while, then a couch can have great value. If you have, if you like to party, or if substance abuse or addiction are a part of your reality, then drugs are of value. Alcohol can be of value. Access to different places can be of value. And this makes it commercial sex. Here in Hawaii, this is considered prostitution. So it is still illegal. I know there's sex workers, that's different. It's not sanctioned in Hawaii, but this is not yet sex trafficking. It becomes sex trafficking when a minor is involved. Again, I mentioned this before. So if you've got a 16-year-old working at a strip club, that is sex trafficking. If you've got a 17-year-old offering sex for money, that's trafficking. If you have a 15-year-old and she's sending nudes to somebody else who's paying her cell phone bill, that is sex trafficking because it's commercial sex. There's the paying the cell phone bill, there's the nude photos, and then there's the minor involved. So that makes it sex trafficking. Now, if you have 18, 25, 30-year-olds, however, what do you want to say, involved in prostitution, in stripping, in live cams, and any of these sorts of things, but the reason that they're doing it is because somebody's forcing them to do it, or somebody's tricking them into doing it, or somebody's blackmailing or coercing them into doing it, that is also sex trafficking. So once more, if you're paying someone for sexual services at a strip club, at a massage parlor, at a game room, in some kind of other capacity, if that person is doing it of their own free will, it is still considered commercial sex. But if that person is being forced and they're being tricked into doing it, someone is holding their immigration papers, someone is holding their pay stub, someone is saying that if you don't do this, I'm going to report you or something else, that is all elements of force, fraud, or coercion that are part of that can be considered sex trafficking. So again, anyone involved in advancing it is also considered part of sex trafficking. I'm going to give you if you're a mandated reporter, sex trafficking is under the Child Abuse Code, so you have to report it. If you suspect sex trafficking and you're a mandated reporter, a teacher, a healthcare provider, a law enforcement, there's so many other classes, a child care provider, you have to report sex trafficking. This is Hawaii law. I mentioned the sort of supply-demand sort of thing. This is how the market works. Traffickers are simply meeting the demand. They're really simply finding young people and finding vulnerable people and finding people who are willing to work to provide for the demand. And if they can't find people, they exploit them. They trick them, they trap them, they blackmail them, and make them work for the demand side of things. So that's really how the trafficking piece works here. Now, the state law, this is a little more convoluted, but I just want to mention the state law has changed. It was signed into law on June 24th of this year. And rather than address all this, because I know it's a busy slide, I want to highlight some of the changes. If you are a person providing sexual services in exchange for a fee or anything of value, that is considered prostitution, and you can be arrested and charged for it. If you're doing that, but you're under the age of 18, it is treated as a violation, kind of like a curfew violation. It wouldn't go on your record. Typically, you'd be seen as the victim of a crime, and you'd be turned over to child welfare services for processing, that sort of thing. Now, if you are the person buying, you are no longer soliciting prostitution. The law changed. It is now called commercial sexual exploitation. And that means if you are providing or agreeing or offering to provide anything of value in exchange for anything sexual, it is considered commercial sexual exploitation. It is a misdemeanor by itself. If the person you are buying from, if the person providing the sexual service is a victim of sex trafficking, being a minor or through force, fraud, or coercion, it becomes a felony. So you'd better be careful. If you're buying sex, you better be careful about who you're buying from. The next part, commercial sexual exploitation of a minor. Same sort of thing. If you're providing, offering, or agreeing to provide a fee or anything of value for anything sexual from a minor, it is commercial sexual exploitation of a minor. Now, you might say, but that person agreed, that girl, that boy was 16, 17 years old, and he or she agreed to do this. Doesn't matter. That is not a defense. By law, if you're under the age of 18, you cannot consent to commercial sex. So if you're buying from someone who's under the age of 18, that is actually not a defense. You are supposed to know that that can't be the case. So you can't actually be charged, even if that person you're buying from has agreed to provide the service for the fee. Another thing that is not a defense, if you didn't know that person was a minor, you cannot use that as a defense either. So again, you must be careful. It puts the onus on the buyer to make sure that he or she is not participating in exploitative practice. And then the sex trafficker is anyone who advances prostitution through force, threat, fraud, coercion, or intimidation, or of a minor. And again, that person is also responsible for knowing the age of the minor, and certainly a minor cannot consent to that. So those are the new state laws. Just want to put them out there for you. These are new. They are effective immediately, so it's not like a January 1st impact date. So yeah. Let me pause there just for any questions, or I'll start with questions, but if anyone has comments or I didn't realize that, I'll pause just to make sure before we move on, we kind of have an understanding of where we are. And then I'll get into a bit more about this. Well, I'm going to keep on going. If you're typing, feel free to continue to do so. I will check the chat. I get a little notification when someone comes in the chat, so I can address it immediately, or I can fit it in somewhere where it might make sense to do so. Risk factors and ability. People ask, what makes someone at risk? There's really two ways to look at it that I like. I like Maslow's hierarchy approach, because this talks about how in order to feel like self-fulfillment, in order to be like living out your hopes and dreams, you need to have some kind of esteem. You need to feel yourself. You need to know who you are. And in order to feel that way, you need to sort of feel like you connect and belong. You need to have love in your life. But to feel that way, you need to be safe. You need to feel safe. And to have any sense of safety, you need to have your basic needs met. So starting at the bottom, if your basic needs are not met, if your basic needs of food, clothing, shelter, if you're addicted to substances, even that can be a basic need. If those are not met, it is easy for someone to come along and exploit you by simply meeting your basic needs. It is a cheap investment for a trafficker to offer you food, to offer you clothing or shelter and these sorts of things. So you are more vulnerable if your basic needs are not met. Safety needs. If you don't feel safe in your home, if you don't feel safe in your school or your community, it is easy for someone to come along and offer you safety or of an appearance of safety to protect you from your mom or your dad, your aunt, your uncle, your brother, your boyfriend, whoever it might be. They can come in and offer those senses of safety and security. If you don't feel connected, if you don't feel connected with your family, your school, your community, if you're out wandering, if you're online seeking connection with strangers, well, groomers, recruiters can come in and meet you there and build those sorts of connections with you. Another approach is the Social-Ecological Approach, and this comes out of the CDC and Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Association. So, or administration. I always forget the last day on SAMHSA. But your age, your race, your ethnicity, your sexuality, these sorts of things can be considered vulnerabilities. Not only because certain ages and races are marginalized, but also certain ages are more susceptible to agree to do things. Some ages are more risk averse, like our teenagers are doing riskier things. They are experiencing their sexuality growing and starting to show. They are engaged with sexualized behaviors, more parties, more independence, puberty, hormones, trying to impress each other. There's a lot of things that go on in a teenager's life that make them particularly vulnerable. It should come as no surprise that this is also an in-demand population. The demand for buying sex, the demand for pornography includes seeking younger-looking people. If you were to look at Pornhub's impact report, Pornhub puts out their own report every year, and so I've read their 2019 report. Teen is a very highly searched topic on their searches. So if the demand is for teenagers, well, the traffickers once again are going to be seeking teenagers. And it's not that hard to recruit teenagers because they're already sexualized, they're already trying to make money, they're already seeking connection and love and these sorts of things. So that is a tremendous vulnerability. Another one, if we start to mix sort of the societal pressures and kind of the way society does things and the way communities can do things, race and ethnicity are significant vulnerabilities. I hate to say this, especially coming from a white guy, but in the one report, the third report out of Arizona State University and the Hawaii's Commission on the Status of Women found that 64% of those who had been exploited identified as at least part Hawaiian, full or part Hawaiian. So the rates among Hawaiians of exploitation are higher. There's a lot of populations here who are exploited at higher rates. The demand is higher for certain ethnicities. Pornhub's top search terms, again, the top 6 search terms in Pornhub, 5 of them are race specific. Some of those races are here. So while some races are generally marginalized more, might be in communities that are less well served, they are also in higher demand. So there's going to be an increased exploitation there, a higher vulnerability there. Now, if you're involved in relationships that are abusive, that are exploitative, that are objectifying or sexualizing, that is another vulnerability. And then you can see a little bit more there. So I do want to make some time for questions here, and I realize I'm running just a little bit behind, so I'm going to move a little bit quickly, but just wanted to highlight among our young people some of the risk factors and vulnerabilities they're facing as teenagers, which I kind of talked about, but also environmental and circumstantial stuff. I mentioned the relational factors. If you've experienced abuse, physically, sexually, or emotionally, that's a significant risk factor because it damages your relationships. It's a relational vulnerability. It's something that you've experienced. It's easy to have a lot of trauma in those situations. It's easy to think that the adults around you cannot or will not protect you. It can lead to feelings of insecurity, of self-blame, but it's very damaging. And there's a significant correlation between experiences of abuse and exploitation. Another one down here is the societal, family, community, and societal exploitation of girls. When we sexualize and objectify other people, it changes our brain chemistry and causes us to treat them like not humans. And this is why when I talk to high school students, I talk about your sexuality is a real part of who you are. Your beauty is a real part of who you are. But when you start to objectify yourself and sexualize yourself over and above some of your other qualities, you can have sort of a disconnect with those other qualities. You can forget about your intrinsic value and other things that make you valuable. At the same time, if you are objectifying and sexualizing others, you take away their humanness. You take away seeing them as humans. You're more likely to be sexually aggressive or sexually violent or sexually objectifying. You're more likely to participate in infidelity and all kinds. There's a lot of brain chemistry behind this, but these are some other things that are vulnerabilities towards either being exploited or towards exploiting others. And again, I talk about demand. It's an overlooked part of the exploitation is the demand side of things. And no matter how safe we feel our communities are, no matter how smart we think our keiki are, grooming can happen to anybody because it's a sneaky process. It's a sneaky process of preparing somebody and grooming and recruiting somebody into being exploited. It's typically slow and gentle. It can take minutes, it can take hours, it can take months. The groomer builds trust while also isolating the targeted young person. It can begin with eye contact, a smile, a compliment, a joke, a shared interest, or small talk. It can begin in person or online. It can look like a friendship or like a romantic relationship. It can look like an uncle or an auntie showing affection, or like a stranger offering money, a job opportunity, something to eat, or a place to stay. Once the trust is established, the groomer begins to isolate the targeted young person by manipulating the young person, monopolizing the young person's time, vilifying parents, manipulating doubts about his or her community, all the while learning the young person's values, secrets, unmet needs, and vulnerabilities that can later be used against him or her. And a lot of this does happen online. People ask me about the impact of COVID. COVID has had a very significant impact. All the vulnerabilities are up. People are out of work, people are struggling, people are stressed, people aren't getting the mental health and substance abuse treatment that they normally would have. People are stuck in overcrowded situations. Young people are running away because they don't have social connections that they might have had through school or other opportunities. There's a lot of things that are going on that are increasing vulnerabilities. So we saw a significant increase in reports. So the first column here, this is reports, the increase from 2019 to 2020. These are reports of online recruitment. It may not look like a lot, but it did nearly double. The other thing about this is just people who knew how to report. Think about how much went on where people like, oh, I just blocked the person. I just ignored it. I just moved on. It was no big deal. This is just the number of people who knew how to report the situations. The second column, sort of middle here, is the total reports of commercial sexual exploitation online. So you can see those reports fully doubled from 150,000 to 303,000. And again, these are just reports by individuals. This is not the full gamut. This is just the people who knew how to report, who reported it. And the third column here, this graph is the total number of reports that are automatically generated by Facebook or Google or whatever through their computer, artificial intelligence, whatever they have going on. Those reports went up by 5 million. We're used to seeing little incremental increases year by year. But in 2019 to 2020, we saw it go up by 5 million. That is a lot. That is really significant. I can't get into all the details there. I mentioned before, we're going to do our online safety. Actually, I'm doing an online safety presentation tomorrow through Child and Family Services through their parent line. So if you, it's probably on their website, but if you go to Child and Family Services, they offer a lot of parenting workshops. We're going to talk about online safety tomorrow morning at about the same time. I think it's either 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. So I don't have that immediately available. If you want to hear more about online safety, we'll talk about it tomorrow. If we have time at the end, I'll throw in maybe a link and see if I can help you with that. Identification and response. Now that we know what it is and kind of what it looks like and some of the vulnerabilities, what do we do about it? Well, I warn against red flags. I know we have a red flag slide. I know we have red flags sort of thing, but everybody wants a checklist. People are like, can I check 4 boxes and call a number? It's not that easy. But if I were to sort of pinpoint some of these things that I really do find concerning from the time when I was doing investigations till now, when I see a second cell phone, instantly I'm asking questions. Why do you need a second cell phone? What's in that cell phone that you can have in your other cell phone? Who's paying for that cell phone? What is that person getting out of this? And usually you get answers like, oh, don't worry about it. It's my boyfriend, it's my manager, it's whatever. It's, it's prepaid and all these sorts of things. But I get very concerned because really, who is paying for it and what are they getting out of it? I've known of situations where someone's paying for a cell phone in exchange for like nude photos, in exchange for weekend sex participation, things like that. Unexplained money, gives them employment for much the same reason. Then there's some other things here, but a significantly older partner is really concerning because there's significant power differentials. 18-year-olds have more power than 14-year-olds. 25-year-olds have more power than 16-year-olds. And I know I don't want to fault people who suggest that age is just a number, but there's a difference in power, and that can lead to an imbalance in a relationship and exploitative situations, people exerting their power over somebody else. I know it happens a lot, and I know there's plenty of healthy relationships where there's a significant age difference, but it does concern me. Maybe I'm over influenced by this sort of topic, but it is something to be concerned with. Recognize this. Young people who have been exploited oftentimes don't realize they've been exploited. What we see as exploitation, they see as the nature of the relationship, the way they party, the way they get down, maybe their side hustle, maybe the way they make money, maybe it's the relationship they have with their family members or whatever that might be. They don't see their trafficker as a trafficker because that doesn't make sense. Why would I date a trafficker? Why would I hang out with the trafficker? It sounds horrible. But yes, they see this person as a boyfriend, as a girlfriend, as a partner, as a manager, as a relative. That's the primary relationship that they see with this person, and they might not see what they're doing as wrong because this person that they know and trust and love would never traffic them. So they see it as a part of a natural course of events. There's a lot of psychological control, a lot of distrust of law enforcement service providers. Oftentimes they don't perceive that they have better options. They feel that what they've gotten themselves into is their responsibility. Then there's a lot of shame and blame. Maybe they already tell themselves, I should never have done that. I shoulda, all these sorts of things. And then the adults around them are saying, well, you should have listened to me. You shouldn't have gone to that party. You shouldn't have dressed that way. You should have. All these shoulds basically say, you're responsible for your behavior. It is your fault that someone else took advantage of you. It is your fault that someone else abused you. And that is a toxic message that I will stand against. No one has the right to abuse you. No one has the right to traffic you. No one has the right to buy sex or whatever from you based on based on a mistake that you might have made. We all make mistakes. Doesn't mean that we can, someone else has the right to traffic us. And then oftentimes they don't think anyone's going to believe them because their whole community says, well, that doesn't happen here. If everyone around you says it doesn't happen here, no one's going to believe you and no one's going to know what to do. When they go online and they see people saying, oh, they're all false accusations, they're just trying to get publicity, they're just trying to get money, whatever else that might be, those sort of messages tell young people no one's going to believe you and it's not worth coming forward with your story. Who's going to believe that your uncle did that? Who's going to believe that the star football player did that? Who's going to believe that the person that we all know and love and trust did that to you? So we have to let them know that we are going to believe them. And then we have to seek Empowerment and New Connections. This is an awesome book. It's dense. It's Dr. Judith Herman talking about trauma and recovery. The core experiences of psychological trauma are disempowerment, disconnection from others. Recovery, therefore, is based upon the empowerment of the survivor and the creation of new connections. Connection, 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 empathy, empathy, empathy. These are strong protective factors against something bad happening, and they're also very strong responsive factors when something has happened, whether someone has disclosed something or not. I'm going to play a quick video. It's just a couple minutes, but it really helps to capture what empathy is, and then I'll wrap up here and hopefully have some time for some questions.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
I love that video. It really captures empathy for me. Again, connection. And as we think about our young people, disclosure isn't the end result. It's not the goal. We may never get disclosure. There are people who are going to go to their grave with their experiences, and we shouldn't be pressing or seeking a disclosure from our young people. We should be engaging all of our young people with these sorts of things, being genuine and proactive and clear and consistent and trustworthy, paying attention, promoting positive self-image, good friends, good adults, being intentional against the shame, blame, fear, stigma, and judgment that they might assume they're going to get in response, using empathy as we just saw in that little clip, standing up for the unidentified survivors, recognizing that they're probably survivors everywhere we go, and they may not feel comfortable talking about it, but we can be there. We can demonstrate ourselves as allies in creating safe spaces for them, and then simply believing them. Believing their story, not assuming they're wrong, not assuming that they need to explain things, not assuming anything, but just assuming that they're describing a real thing that happened to them, and then coming alongside them and saying, listen, I don't know what to do or say. I'm just so glad you told me, and I'm here with you right now. With that said, if you are a mandated reporter, and I do ask that if you see something, say something. 911 is a fine call. The blocks in bold yellow are the ones for mandated reporters. Down at the bottom, the very bottom right-hand number, 888-398-1188, is the number that you would call on Hawaii Island to report sex trafficking to child welfare services. So these are the the two numbers that you really want to focus on, the 911 and the 888-398-1188. So with that, that wraps up what I have for you today. Please feel free asking your questions. Maybe you have some, and sometimes it takes a little while to even develop questions. I know sometimes this is heavy and quick and dense, but I'm going to put my email address in here. Let me spell it right. And you're welcome to reach out to me or Anastasia. Again, if you weren't here at the very beginning, Anastasia is on Hawaii Island. I'm on Oahu, but she is busy sharing with another conference right now, actually, and then so I'm kind of stepping in for. But really, we work in tandem. I've been to Hawaii Island. I presented to Wakea High School, and then did some training over there for some other groups. And with these virtual platforms, it's nice that we can connect. We've been able to connect with all islands on that. I also want to share how you can register. As I mentioned, if you're interested in the online safety, I didn't mean to really cross promote, but we are doing our online safety presentation tomorrow morning with Child and Family Services. And it looks like here's how you can register if you're interested. Like I said, we're not doing the online safety one again until January. We're doing the overview again tonight, so if you like this and think other people should benefit from that, you can register for tonight's session. And then next week, we're going to do a trauma-informed response, which is kind of our part 2 follow-up. And then on the 3rd Wednesday of this month, we'll be doing our guy talk, where we talk about sex trafficking through a slightly different lens. It's more engaging, more inclusive of content related to boys and men. And both are experiences of being exploited and talking a little bit about demand as well. But if you want to know a little bit more, there's our website. That's the education section where if you click on it, there's a giant video of me, which is a little weird for me to see sometimes, but then you can scroll down to the bottom and see how you can register for some of the upcoming webinars. And if you gotta go, I understand that too. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's so nice to connect with you, and I appreciate you expressing your interest in being here and sitting through the presentation and hopefully learning a little bit. And hopefully this is helpful in keeping yourselves, your community safe. Great, thanks, Denise.
Thank you so much, everybody, to our speakers, for the very fabulous and insightful talks on, identity and intersectionality, history, cultural significance, and the vision of the future. So thank you so much for your time and with us today, and thanks to all the attendees for coming, and hope everyone has a wonderful day, and you enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you so much. Oh, wait. He's at one. Oh, you're at one. Yeah.
Hey, Ray, it's a bit difficult to hear you.
No, that was awesome. Good job.
Hey, Tim, can you hear me now?
I can, yes. Yeah, okay.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so thank you again so much, Tim, for that awesome presentation. Yes, if we did not, we're not able to get to those questions, we will try to get to them and for them onto Tim and everything to get them answered and back to you guys. But I do want to thank Tim for being here and for all of you guys who have stopped by this session. And I hope we learned a lot of information today. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for this opportunity. Really do appreciate it. Really appreciate all you're doing with Puna Strong. I saw the lineup and it's so impressive. I'm so glad to see so many great groups coming together. That's
Oh,
awesome.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. So we're going to end this session here, and we are just about ready for our noon keynote. It's a pre-recorded session, and we will see you at 1 o'clock for the 1 o'clock breakouts.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Aloha. Take care.
Bye-bye.